Hi, Maurice. So I am Clara Ana Rosa, or Clara Wojtkowska. I'm the founder and director of Mhondoro Dreams Productions, which is a artistic production company where we put together old ceremonies, wisdom, rituals. We create new, not new versions, but we put together the old and the new. And so for the past a year and a half, really, I've been investigating star mythologies, and thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me about the stars. I know that you're just an incredible wisdom keeper when it comes to all things heavens. So maybe first thing, maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit and tell us how did that connection start? How did that happen?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that I always wanted to connect nature and understand nature and connect our Earth existence with whatever is up in the sky and understand that we are part of a larger community, so to speak. A larger context. So I never really doubted astrology. It seems like it was very natural to me early on to understand it. I read books about it and it made complete sense to me, even when I was just a young 8-year-old. And then I invested a little bit more time studying more seriously. And I was also born in Africa, so I was interested in the indigenous cultures, but I didn't really have, as much time to research the star lores of the different local tribes and cultures. However, my perspective is based on understanding the soul journey through the astrology, understanding that the time we're born, and I mean the exact hour, minute, and the location, of course, is a particular gateway and a particular map that is very unique to the person born at that time. It can never be replicated astrologically. And the question is, if we understand the soul journey, how come they were born that time and not another? And how come that place and not another? So we understand the concept of synchronicity, which is a Carl Jung concept. I mean, it started before him, but he coined the term. And understanding that the soul is in alignment with whatever planetary cycles are occurring. And that entry gate at that particular time reflects where are we at with our soul journey? What have we completed and what are the next steps? So it's a very deep and informative analysis. And that takes into consideration reincarnation.
Yeah, no, like you say, it's yeah, thank you. It's a very profound journey, and it's very uncomfortable I think for many people, because and maybe you can talk a little bit about this, the question of determinism, the question of fate, the question of how much choice do we really have, and something that I have really wondered in my own life, which is, why is it that some people feel like they have absolutely so much choice and other people feel very much like tied to destiny, like very, very, And is there any way out of that in terms of the relationship with the stars? And why do the stars determine that journey, you know?
It's wonderful questions and important. I have a whole video on fate and free will. And it is really a very important existential question, and maybe there's no definite answer. But let's put it this way, you know, we are fated to the truth. You know, you can lie to yourself and you can live in any kind of illusion or misconception for as long as you choose to. But ultimately, we cannot avoid the truth. The truth will meet us at some point. Maybe our free will is how long does it take us to get there.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. The other thing is that, for example, you know, some people ask me, can you look at when we're going to die? You know, when you look at the chart. And what I will say is, and that's not just what I believe, but it's what has emerged from these studies and experience, is that you can have certain times where there is a high probability of death. So it's almost like maybe these are death markers. But if you do the right thing, so to speak, if you are in tune with the higher purpose, you can get a second lease. You can extend that deadline. So there is choice in how you navigate this road and how much you choose to suffer. And I mean choose, you know, it's not always fair to say you choose to suffer, because we all have our blind spots. But I would say that's where fate and free will interrelate, is that ultimately we're all going to the same place and there's no other choice. The truth is our only choice. But how much you're going to struggle and how long it's going to take you, that is part of your responsibility. And responsibility means free will. Because if everything is fate, then you don't have any responsibility. So in a way, we do have some free will over the amount of suffering we cause or experience.
That's a really interesting way of putting it. And, you know, it's interesting because when you started talking about it, I thought, okay, you know, this is a very, that sort of severe relationship with the heavens and the stars. And then you said, well, actually, it's about, you know, how much you choose to suffer, which in a way lightens the relationship. Because I think part of it, and it is true also when you look at these old mythologies of the stars, the severity of the determinism, the severity of the cataclysms, and also, which maybe you can speak to, I'm sure you know a lot about it, the sense that the ancients knew that there would be a very difficult time that would come for humanity. And they tried as much as they could to send us messages into the future, you know, or have us be able to access their knowledge, even though they knew that we would forget all of it. So that sense of like, there are certain things that you don't fight against, even though you know that they're bad or wrong or difficult or cause suffering.
Well, you know, let's reframe what astrology is. So astrology, you know, by the simple definition, is that the moment you're born, we take a snapshot of where the planets are in the solar system. And that determines, there are certain angles, certain distances, certain celestial locations, and they all have a meaning. That's the beautiful thing about astrology, is that you combine measurement with meaning. So you combine astronomy, data, with meaning, and that bridges the science with the spirituality. So that's one thing. The second thing is that the planets keep moving. You freeze them to understand your moment of birth, but they don't really stop. And so they, like you say, astrology is really a study of time. Because what are we looking at? We're looking at cycles. It takes 127 days for the moon to return to the same position. It takes a year for the sun. All our calendars, our day and nights, are regulated by the planets, and the moon and the sun in particular. But astrology just takes that one step further and understands that the cycle of Mars and Venus and Pluto, etc., are also part of a rhythm and cycles. So what we're really doing is that we're looking at a cosmic clock that has, at least 10 hands as far as the solar system main planets are. And so if you're born at a certain time, what time was that? What does that mean? Was it time to ascend? Was it time to descend? Was it time to create something special? What's the message and the nature of that particular time? Now, if we look at the nature of time, it's the same way we look at the nature of human being. It's all the same planets, and it's the same, orbits around the sun, just different locations, different ratios. So, it's the same concept of understanding that our individuality is just we're built of the same materials, but at a slightly different dose. So a person has a little bit more of that and a little less of that, but underneath it all, it's the same material. It's the same planets. So through astrology, we look at those variables and we can determine where you are at and what's your greater focus in this life, and understand that there are things you cannot change. You cannot change your moment of birth.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
That's fate.
Yeah.
But maybe you can change your future birth based on what you're doing here and now, what you manage to integrate.
No, that's very profound. That's very profound. And certainly, before my moment of star awakening, which happened in Egypt in 2020, it was definitely a before and after thing. I didn't pay attention I didn't look up, and then once you get into it, then it starts to make sense, and it starts to, like what you say, it starts to work on you, and you feel time differently and all of these characters. But one question that I have and that I carry is this sense of two questions actually. So the first one has to do with the astrology that we know, like the knowledge that you have of this planet behaves in this way, has this effect, and so on and so forth. how, where does it come from? Who accumulated it? How do we know, as far as, and then also there's planetary astrology, and then there's star astrology, and there seems to be, not that there's a difference, but I guess when I look at the story of the soul and the story of the ancients that they had about, the soul coming from, I don't know, coming from Orion or coming from Sirius and then going back there, and the Milky Way, versus, this thing of, then there are these planets, which are not those stars, but they are the ones that determine your life here. And can you speak more about that?
Yeah. What was the first question, though? Remind me.
Oh yeah, the first question was about the, where does this knowledge really come from?
Well, think about the fact that people back in time were not distracted by light pollution at night. The stars were so present and so bright that people had to look up. They had to look up to navigate, and like we said, there's a night and day. Where does it come from, right? So there's first of all a survival need to understand our existence based on the rotation of the Earth and see how the sky is changing. That informs us a lot about what's going on down here. Not to mention that moon cycles affect tides and other natural phenomena. So people had to pay attention. They were not distracted by what we have in the modern world. And even, the fact that with light pollution, you can't see a lot of the sky anymore. And so it started with observation and correlation. Every time this planet is here, this happens. And of course, the markers initially were more looking at angles, what's on the rising, what is setting, and what is culminating, what is at the top. So these were the main arteries or the main axis. And there's a whole study around that. And like you say, this doesn't only involve the solar system planets, but every constellation. But what is particular, why did the focus grow on the planet, is first of all because the planet moves faster. It takes 72 years for a star to shift 1 degree. So that's a whole other scale. But it takes, the moon a month to do a whole 360. And it takes the planets, just 12, 30, 40 years to complete cycles. So it works on our scale better to measure our life experiences based on the planetary alignments. Now, the planetary alignments are also on the sun path. So the sun goes, from our perspective, we see the sun go through a certain cycle around us. We know that, we already know that we're not the center of the universe, but we experience the sun as rotating around the Earth, and the planets do the same. So they are more or less in the same range of travel. And so it creates a whole cosmology and a very intimate interrelation between those planets. Creates many stories. However, the ancients, and even now, it's also done, is that even though the planets, Orion stays Orion for thousands of years, it's going to take thousands or even millions of years for Orion to start look differently. and for the constellation to morph into something else. It's not on our scale. However, we can determine based on the sun, on the Earth's spin, when is Orion rising? When do we see it? Do we see it in the southern sky? Do we see it in the northern sky? So based on our rotation, Orion does move differently. In the sky, it doesn't really move differently. It just pretty much stays there, and it's going to be like that again for thousands of years. And, sailors and people, I lived in Hawaii for many years, and they have a very rich navigation system because these people needed to be at sea. They had to rely on the stars to find themselves in the middle of the ocean. So they definitely looked at the constellations, and they have their pointers based on their latitude, what was most significant to them. So yeah, there are different ways. The sky can inform us in so many ways, but it boils down to the same premise that it gives us an indication of time. And when we have time, we also can derive space. Because when you look at something, so the sun is rising in New York City in a different time that it's rising in Zimbabwe. So whatever time is also factoring space.
Yeah, and that's very profound, because in some ways also the fact that one of our modern maladies is this lack of time. It's also a way of, like we stopped looking at the stars, so we're running out of time. It's like they are the keepers of the time, they can give us time.
They give us time, and they give us a meaning to time. Like the sunrise today has a different meaning than the sunrise tomorrow, and so forth. So each moment is not just a measurement. The sun, the moon, the stars are in certain alignment, but there's also a why. There's also a story that comes with that.
Yeah, and that's some of the myths and the stories and the question, of maybe you've probably read Hamlet's Mill, or the book on it's about the precession of the equinoxes, but it's about the correlation between a lot of myths and how they're actually about the stars and the precession of the equinoxes. And it's a very profound book, because it talks about Hamlet being based on this old myth about the mill, and the mill is the mill of the heavens, and there's this young prince and so on, but he's actually he's a star. And when I read that book, I thought, wow, because I'm a theater person as well. I'm an artist. I create things, and so this thing of having all of these thousands of people over all of this time psychoanalyzing Hamlet, and saying we are so interested in the life of this young prince, where actually we are not interested in the life of a young prince at all. This is just a vehicle to carry star knowledge, and we're so attracted to it, but we don't know why. We don't. I mean, of course, that's not the only story about Hamlet, but it's the one that completely convinced me, because I always wondered, why are we so intrigued by a very sick young man and his very sad family? So yeah.
And, you speak about the myths, and there are so many stories. And if you study yourself, you mentioned studying local tribes and their mythologies, where is it coming from? You ask, where is the star knowledge coming from, and how was that accumulated? You see so many ancient stone calendars, going back to Armenia and Stonehenge, of course, and in South Africa, you have Adam's calendar, and so many accounts of people trying to, even Egypt, trying to kind of bring the stars to the earth, rebuild those alignments, but also capture the solstices and the equinoxes, and understanding the shift of time, the shift of seasons, because time is also seasons. It has a lot to do with planting cycles and survival, migrations of animals. So what is fascinating is that, you ask yourself where these myths are coming from. Then the most fascinating is that you start to see overlaps. Orion in African, I'm not sure exactly what language, but Orion is referred to as Madzian. And in many different mythologies and tribes that we don't think had any communication, whether it's, between Australia, South Africa, South America, and in Europe, many people come back to see Orion as a hunter. Like, why did they come up to the same conclusion? When you look at the stars, you can make up all kinds of patterns. Why is the hunter story repeating itself? And then you do have some cultures where it's completely different. And it's not tied to what others are saying, which is also interesting. But it takes us back to another Jungian concept of archetypes. So we are projecting on our myths, stories, themes that are part of our own unconscious archetypes. And it's no coincidence, really, that there are overlaps between cultures that do not necessarily knew about each other. Or maybe they had different means of communication. But it goes back to understanding that we're built of the same components, the same star material, and it's not completely far-fetched that we come up to the same conclusion, because the truth is the truth, whether you're in Zimbabwe or Australia or somewhere else. You will reach the same conclusions at some point.
So when you say the truth is the truth, I feel like I intuitively understand what you're saying. Can you say a bit more about this? What I understand from it is this, in a way, like the reckoning of the soul, which is the other part of, you've already mentioned it, but also in terms of the star knowledge, that seems to be, there's the time piece, and then there's you have a soul, you have one for sure. It has a journey, and that journey is very big, and it's relentless. Like, it's not going to stop just because you need a break.
Time doesn't stop.
Right, yeah.
But, there's always an argument about, is the truth relative or is it absolute?
Right.
And the same thing, with time. For a fly, a minute is an eternity. For us, a minute goes by quickly. Unless you're in pain, then a minute can last forever. So the minute remains a minute. Your perception of it will vary whether you're a fly or a human being, or whether you're thirsty and in pain, or whether you're having fun. And that's the same about the absolute value of truth versus the relative truth. You know, if I live in the desert, I experience life differently from someone who lives on the Arctic.
Mm-hmm.
But we're still looking at nature. You know, we're still looking at cycles. We just have a different angle and different conditions. Now, what makes someone in the desert see things differently from someone in the Arctic? Time and space. Your time and your space will flavor your experience differently. And to me, it's the same analogy of having, you know, multiple windows looking at the same center garden. So you're looking at the same piece, but you are all, you know, in that window, you see from one angle just the back of it, from another angle a different light. So the truth is the truth, but where you are in your journey will tell us, will inform us, what are you now focusing on? What is your current experience? But if you take time and space, if we move beyond time and space, then we are everywhere, always, everything. You know, there's no more Sahara or Arctic. It's all, you know, beyond time and space. It's all the same. It's all one. And so the truth can be interpreted according to time and space. This time I see this side of the truth. This time I see another side of the truth. But if you take time away, it's all encompassing. It's yeah, you see the totality of it.
Yeah, these are very philosophical, you know, and I like those kinds of things, but, you know, it brings up the question of, well, two questions really. One of them is the healing of the past, which sometimes can feel like changing the past, in that the past starts speaking differently, and it starts speaking differently in the present. And then there's the question of, I guess in your experience, is it true that there is such a thing as a young soul and there is such a thing as an old soul? Is that tangible? Is that yeah.
I think so. I do see that in my practice. We, especially looking at astrology from an evolutionary point of view, from a soul journey point of view, we are at different sequences of that journey. So you will have those who've covered more ground than others. And that's why we're looking at two different ages. You know, you have this plane age, you're a baby and a teenager and an adult, but you have another soul age. And that's why you can have young children who are more mature, more advanced than old people, seniors, who've, you know, supposedly had more experience. So yes, I would definitely say that empirically you can measure the fact that our chronological age in our own mortal experience is relative. It's not an absolute value.
Mm-hmm. And you see that in terms of people's experiences in their life, or I'm curious about, again, like when people come to you, are there markers of that in not just in the astrology, but in terms of, you know, how the astrology is actually interpreted in the person's life?
Absolutely. I mean, you're asking deep questions. You know, it boils down to another way of explaining it. You may have, I said that there's no astrology chart that replicates itself.
Mm.
So unless you're born at the same place and the same time,
Mm-hmm.
which can happen, you know, obviously. And it can also happen with biological twins who are born by cesarean. So they're pulled out of the womb, you know, within a minute or two, which is, you know, it's significant, but not really at the same time. Like there's going to be tiny, tiny variables between a minute and another.
Mm-hmm.
But do people who are born with the same astrology chart, will they lead the same life?
Mm.
And no, they don't. However, they will have many parallels. And there are, you know, there's a study that is fascinating about twins raised apart. So twins who were adopted, or, you know, circumstances led them to not be raised in the same family, which means they only share the chart and the genetics.
Mm.
And you have even twins who are born with the same family, you will hear in 95% of the cases, parents will tell you they're so different. And yes, they are so different for many reasons. And yet, you will see crazy stories like the twins, you know, marrying on the same day, giving birth on the same day, experiencing an illness around the same time. So having all kinds of milestones, markers that are completely synchronized, and yet, you know, not always leading the same lifestyle and not always making the same choices, because there's a consciousness component. Twins are not the same soul. They're two different souls.
Mm.
And they will sometimes have different soul age.
Mm.
I'm talking both of the biological twins as well as the astro twins. You know, we call them astro twins, people who are not biologically related, but were born in the same time and place. So that's where we can measure that, you know, that there is a what's the word, another component that goes beyond astrology and beyond genetics.
Yeah, you know, it's quite interesting that you mentioned that. I have a brother who was born on the same day as me, but 2 years later, and he's late now. But I always felt like somehow we were, and even, you know, after his passing, actually, especially after his passing, the sense that somehow we were on the same project. Like we were on the same, we were doing the same things in some ways, you know, or like we were working together in some, not physically, but somehow, you know, and yeah, and it was quite, it's quite a profound connection. But you know, it's interesting also from what you say about these different expressions, there's the expression of the soul, and then the expression of the planets, or they give you a certain time, they so on. So from the sense of, you know, the character of all of these planets, how does the Earth feel about having all of these planets like energies tossed at her all of the time, in the sense that, you know, she's tossing her energy on some other planet, so their astrology is influenced by our Earth? And I don't know, does that make sense as a question?
You look at nature, everything is interacting. You know, there's nothing that's really separate. We have individuality, but our individuality is just a piece of a puzzle that's much larger than us. And I think it would be more difficult to think that there is no connection, that the fact that Saturn is out there means that it has no influence whatsoever on what's happening here. Just look around us. You know, everything impacts everything. So to me, it's not a struggle necessarily that we are part of this dance, this cosmic clock. It's very, it's what keeps the gravity in the right amount so that we don't fly off and we don't decompose or disintegrate. There's a delicate balance that is maintained because of this dialogue.
Well, the way that you talk about it is definitely refreshing, because there's a lot of direness in, you know, and when you hear astrology, a lot of people are afraid of astrology. A lot of people are afraid of, they say, there's always something bad happening, you know, or there's always some. Yeah.
Well, it can happen because life is challenging. I mean, let's face it. It's a lot of work to be here. You know, we have our moments of grace and moments of, you know, amazing beauty, but there's a lot of struggle and there's a lot of suffering. But at the same time, like everything else, is knowledge a good thing, or is ignorance bliss? You know, you're afraid of astrology because it's going to inform you on something. Do you rather not know and live in your innocence, or would you rather understand? And yeah, it can inform you on possible dangers, but it's going to also inform you on why you're here and how to make the best of your life. So it's a whole package. You can't just say, I want to know just the stuff that pleases me. You know, if you open the door of knowledge, you have to be ready for the greater truth. And there's a reason why we forget things. There's a reason why we don't remember all of our childhood or even our past lives, is because we do want to protect ourselves from, you know, trauma and difficult experiences. Like we can't take it all in. There's so much we can process. But at the same time, when we do feel ready, then that's why, you know, some souls will have greater capacity, maybe because they're older and they can handle more. That can also be a reference to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you. This is really great. I have one very important question. I want to make sure I remember to ask, and it has to do with, I don't know if I'll frame it the right way. How, again, in your experience and your interaction with the stars and all this, how do you feel about all of the stories that humanity originated out there and came here, or the stories about civilization being brought here, or does that have anything to do with astrology, and how do you feel about those things?
It is related and it's not related at the same time. Like, you could study astrology without thinking that you're originating from, Sirius. So it's not a variable that you have to use necessarily. But if we look at it from a different point of view, we know certain things, we aspire to certain things that are not here. We live in a certain culture that informs us, that educates us, that gives us, moral guidance, tells us what success means, and how to survive. So we get that from our parents and our teachers and what we watch on TV. But there's so much that we know that is not from here, that hasn't been passed on by anyone. And that can even be something very emotional. That's where we can say what your intuition, you know certain things, you don't know exactly how, but you tap into something that is beyond your own memory or your own body of knowledge. So that's where you start to understand, there's a whole part of your brain that is a reservoir of knowledge that is beyond your little life. Whether you have antennas that connect you to other spheres, or whether you come from another sphere altogether, that we can debate about that. But part of the reason people even want to change and say, this is not good anymore, is because they know there's more to life than this. There must be more to life than this. And so how do I know? Where is it coming from? Is it from a book? Maybe. But if we look at the sum of it, it often comes from another source. And we go back to this sense of older souls, younger souls. You can have people who come with extraordinary knowledge that is not from here. Where is it coming from? Even prodigies like Mozart, who could play music and understand it. It's not just the mechanical practice of using your fingers. It's a fusion, it's a deep understanding of melodies and structures and harmonies that has not been informed in his short life. Like, he couldn't have just known that from books. And so I cannot tell you, empirically, yeah, we came from there and we came from here. But there are many clues that point to the fact that, first of all, we're not just a physical being. We are, part of us is soul. and part of us lives beyond the physical incarnation. And then you have those who can, if we look at more tangible proof, you have those who have near-death experiences, who can talk about transcendental experiences in a more vivid way. But there's also that interesting, we talked about the mythology repeating in different cultures. There are also repetitions about, the origins of humanity and so forth. That, we can find in the Aboriginal Australians, we can find in the Khoisan people, or we can find in different traditions. And it's also very interesting to me that the oldest earth-bound beings are in the Southern Hemisphere, South Africa, and I believe Ethiopia, maybe, along the east side of Africa, has some of the human remains, the oldest forms of life and human remains, and the same with Australia. So there seem to be different categories about our origins. The same way that some people are on Earth for a longer time than others who've just arrived. There's a civilization component on that scale as well.
Wow.
So the Aboriginal people have been on this planet for a very long time. And maybe others, don't have that history here. They have a history somewhere else. But we know also from accounts of the indigenous people who are more easily able to time travel, who are more easily able to access the stars energetically. So they may be from here, but they may also have channels of communication that are more accessible than the average Western white person.
Yeah, no, that's I agree. Yeah, there's a lot. It's very interesting. Thank you so much for your time and for talking to me. And in so many ways, I've felt in this conversation like I just understand everything you're saying on some level somewhere. And so I'm not quite sure if the words that we are exchanging, if other people will understand what we are saying, but there's a sense of, the cosmology and the journey in that cosmology, and what you just said, this sense of coming down, arriving, leaving, coming, arrive, and the soul journey and the truth that there's no, we have no sense of, there's no getting out of it. There's only delay and painful delay. So I feel very nourished by your approach also. It feels very
thank you.
Yeah, very kind somehow.
And this is also, it's also in teaching people what astrology really is. Because for the most part, people, see astrology as their entertainment columns in whatever magazine, but it is a very, very rich study that involves both very practical references about time and spiritual understanding. So, I hope at some point people will incorporate that more in their lives so that they can better understand themselves, better understand their children, and make better decisions. Because one of the great gifts of astrology is that it helps you be in alignment with these greater cycles, which is nature. The stars and the planets are part of nature. Just the same way nature responds to the stars and to this cycle just by the seasons and colder weather, warmer weather, the most immediate connection to the rotation of the earth. Imagine if a great majority of people would be in tune with that, in tune with those cycles, and better understand how to proceed, how to move forward in a way that's intelligent, not in a way that is imposed. That the misinterpretation is that the planets are boxing you, into something.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's empowering. And I know that that's a big part of your teaching, and that your students also are, that's what they carry, which I think is the empowering. To empower somebody who is carrying fate and the truth is it's a really beautiful thing. So I'm just very grateful for your work.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And all the best with your next steps.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'll let you know about the star mythology, and when I post this and all that kind of thing. But thank you very, very, very kindly, and I'm wishing you just the most beautiful cycles and time and beautiful stars out there in Arizona. So
thank you so much, and the best for 2022 to all of us.
To all of us. Very true. Yeah, thank you so much, Maurice.
Blessings.
Yeah, take care.